If you want to read better and think more clearly and understand the ideas shaping our world, then this might be for you. You should join the Dr. John Patrick Book Club. It's a private online community where we read great books together and learn how to think, not just what to think. Inside, you're going to have access to Dr. John Patrick as we work through books and ask questions. If you've ever felt like there are books you should be reading or ideas that you want to understand better, but you didn't want to do it alone, this is a good place to start. You can find the link in the show notes or the description below to join.
Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you this week about the way we come to understand our faith. We had a very interesting meeting in my men's group on Saturday. The week before, I'd asked them whether they would mind, for my benefit, telling me how they would begin to answer the question, why I am a Christian. There were about 10 or so present, and it was very interesting because they didn't follow any of the standard views, except perhaps a couple were fairly standard, but they really illustrated the way God deals with each of us as individuals. One of my favorite poems deals with this. It's called The Pulley. It's by George Herbert. And this is how it goes. When God at first made man, having a glass of blessings standing by, let us, said he, pour on him all we can. Let the world's riches, which dispersed lie, contract into a span. So strength first made a way, then beauty flowed, then wisdom, honour, pleasure. When almost all was out, God made us stay, perceiving that alone of all his treasure, rest in the bottom lay. For if I should, said he, bestow this jewel also on my creature, he should adore my gifts instead of me, and rest in nature, not the God of nature. So both should losers be. Yet let him keep the rest, but keep them with repining restlessness. Let him be rich and weary, that at least if goodness lead him not, yet weariness may toss him to my breast. Absolutely stunningly beautiful poem. The line which always moves me is that, keep them with repining restlessness. Much to my surprise, when I looked up again, the Oxford Book of English Verse has a dozen pages or so of Herbert's poems, including that one. Repining restlessness. We are made for God, for fellowship with God, and without it we constantly have this emptiness. No, I'm going to be an old man, and looking at my colleagues along the way, many of whom thought they were making major contributions to science, medicine, or whatever. But already at this stage, their contributions have contracted into very small footnotes in most cases, or even nothing at all. We work very hard thinking that we are the end of all things, and of course we're not. So what happened in that last Saturday morning was intriguing for me, because when we answer the question, why do I believe? Why am I a Christian? I think there's a common underpinning which goes to that repining restlessness. The only way to make sense of our lives is if this is not all there is. I mean, caring for severely disadvantaged children, many of whom could not be helped very much except journeyed with, so to speak, is a very humbling experience because they rarely complain about their lot. Some do, but very few. And they accept it in some way. They are comforted in some way that they don't understand. And sometimes they say the most stunning things and stop everybody in their tracks. That's the way the world works. Repining restlessness eats at all our souls until sometimes only weariness has Herbert puts it, tosses us into the breast of God. So what's going on? I mean, when you think about it, the fact that suffering always seems to us to be unjust, where does that come from? I mean, if Darwin is right, then Tennyson's comment that nature red in tooth and claw, that's what we should expect. Some win, some lose, only the genes march on. But that's no comfort to a mother with a child who's not going to grow up and is going to consume 20 years of her life. That's why do we have deep down this deep sense that this is not as it was meant to be? So in an ironic way, suffering becomes not an argument against, but an argument for God. And as Tom Holland puts it, the amazing thing in human history is that man nailed to a cross is at the center of the history of the world, arms wide open, appealing to all of us. It's an astonishing story. So how should we talk about it? Well, what happened around that table was very interesting. There were a couple who had experiences of God in the church through music, through the choir. Another who was suddenly, out of the blue, overwhelmed by the crucifixion and the deep sense that he did that for me. Now, those are all steps that are quite common starting points. There were 3 of us, I think, who were brought up in deeply Christian homes, perhaps 4 actually. And so in my own case, for instance, I don't have a conversion story as such. I grew up where the Bible was read every day, twice at least, Sunday many times. It was the center of our family. It was clearly the thing that gave the most pleasure to my parents. The church was the center of their life and therefore mine. So I always believed the story was true. And that actually never disappeared. I realized it had to be true. Primarily, in my case, it was being interested in ancient history. And when I read the stories of the martyrs, I said, you don't die for something you know to be untrue. And I mean, the peak martyrdom period, some of them were very close to the time of Christ. They had first-hand accounts of what had happened. And the accounts of the way martyrs died transformed the world. Seeing faith in action amongst humble people is often a starting point when people have the honesty to say, I wonder what I'd do in the same situation, not what they did. I'd be screaming my head off. I would not be at peace as they were. So the only explanation that makes sense is that it was true. The ancient world, looking at this small group of Christians, immediately recognized that it was different. So the big thing to confront Muslims with is Muslims conquered the world with the sword, the known world, and they did it very effectively in a very short period of time to become the world's biggest empire at that point. But Christianity conquered with the phrase, they love one another. They do not destroy their unwanted young. They conquered by demonstrating a way of life which was strangely attractive, even though it brought suffering and persecution. And that empire, of course, became the biggest in the world, the empire of Christ. Empires come and go, but he remains. So seriously thinking about history doesn't go against Christianity, it goes for it. We are, in the Western world, the product of Judeo-Christian thought. And that thought has been the most powerful stream of thought in the world, without any question. Even Marxists ought to realize that Marxism is a Christian heresy. It has utopian dreams, but based on a fallacy. We're all sinners. Surely that is something that everybody recognizes. My usual question, imagine a bubble over your head with all your thoughts on display. Where are you going to hide? That's who we are. We do have a nature. Of course, many in the university want to deny that. We're just products of stories, narratives, so they want to control the narrative. And if you beg to disagree, they cancel you if they can. Hopefully, I think that is over. I think the woke story is coming to an end. But it can take the more intelligent and educated you are, it seems to me, the longer it takes to get there. The ultimate example of that, for me, would be Antony Flew, who was the doyen of atheistic philosophers in the 1950s. At the end of his life, he became a Christian. The only story that actually made sense. The other very interesting thing going around that table was nobody gave a mechanistic account. I came to this conclusion, then this one, then this one, then this, a logical, rational sequence. One guy, who's obviously still in that process, said, well, I'm a skeptic. I'm not even sure the story is true, but I like coming to church. You can't live with the acid of skepticism bathing everything you do. You need some foundations. But he's a good man. He's been caught in a trap that I was in for many years in terms of practice. I didn't cease to believe, but the way I lived was not dominated by what I said I believed. It was dominated by science. I mean, from the 19th and early 20th century, scientism, and for many people still, science is the answer to everything. Look how that thought screwed up COVID management. It's not everything. Scientism is a faith. Believing that science can fix everything cannot be proved. Believing that there is no God is a logical fallacy because it can never be proved. A universal negative is undisprovable. It's just there. So the question of how we come is interesting. One of the other recurrent themes was a desire for a good world, to be good. And you come across that all the while, especially as people come to the end of their lives. They say, well, I've lived a good life. I've been a decent person. Where does that idea come from? It's not in the animal world. The animal runs on instincts. But we actually know that some behaviors are good and some are bad. And we actually have a desire for the good. What do you really care about? Very important. C.S. Lewis is a good example. I mean, he suffered by the loss of his mother, who died when he was young, and he never got over it in one sense. He was obviously highly intelligent. He was sent to a private school in England, which is illogically called a public school, Malvern College, and it was a horrible experience. He'd had an even worse experience with preparatory schools. His dad then did something sensible. He sent him for a year to stay with a guy who'd been his father's headmaster, and he taught him the classics and taught him Latin and Greek. And then he had to go into the First World War, which actually meant that he got into Oxford, because I can't believe this, but he couldn't pass the prelims in mathematics. But when he came back from the First World War, he didn't have to do prelims anymore, so he got in. And he found his niche, of course. He was made to be a professor, fluent in ancient languages, in love with literature, and with a capacity to write lucid prose that is beyond belief at times. To think that during the Second World War, he was broadcasting what was really the beginnings of mere Christianity, and it was very much appreciated on radio, on the third program, which was thought of as an intellectual program. He could communicate. I mean, by that time he had become a Christian. But his becoming a Christian, described in Surprised by Joy, is interesting. The actual process he can't describe. He was struggling with whether there was a God or not, and what that would mean and how it would work out. And he says something like this, paraphrasing freely. He says, I got down on my knees for the first time since childhood to make a thorough evaluation of myself. And I discovered that I was a zoo of ambition, a harem of hatred. He goes on. He discovered, he said, my name is Legion. And then he goes on and says, that night he was picked up and carried, kicking and struggling, into the kingdom of God, perhaps the most unhappy man in England that night. He had become a Christian, but he didn't know it, and he was fighting against it. How often do you come across that experience? The need that people have for something deeper. I mean, it's happening to the young at the moment. I mean, the boys in particular, feminism has so attacked boys that they feel useless and they feel unwanted. What are they doing? They're going back to church. The girls are playing with social justice, which in a totally incoherent way. So unusually, the boys are ahead of the girls in terms of realizing that there is a God, that Christianity is probably true, and it's growing. Across the world, the Muslim world, girls who have been oppressed by the chauvinism of Islam, male chauvinism, are having meetings with Christ in dreams and visions. And interestingly, nothing is said to begin with, but they know that they are loved, and for the first time in their lives, they are seen, that he knows who they are. Very few words are spoken, but their lives are transformed. And not the odd one. Thousands, tens of thousands, even some honest Muslim clerics are saying, we are having a tsunami of departure from Islamic faith. And if we don't do something, it's all over. But what can they do? Another of the vagaries of history, which one day we will understand. So the young are being moved, boys in particular, but some girls are following. And I think they will get tired of what's happened to them, because the most important change in the lives of female university students is the incredible increase in anxiety that has occurred over the last 15 years or so. The anxiety is huge, and it's all due to screens by the looks of it, or at least that's the most likely explanation. Certainly, you can prove this for yourself. If you've got your phone on at the moment, could you turn it off? Do you turn it off when you go to church, if you go to church? I mean, even with the telephone, we were bad. I mean, we would interrupt our prayers to answer the telephone. Would you really do that if you were talking to the Queen, for instance, or the King? You wouldn't say, excuse me, while I answer my phone, but we'd do it to God. We've lost our way in a big way. So if you really want to test this out, how dangerous screens are, just give them up for a week at some point. I mean, we lived without them before. We can live without them again. If people really want to get to you, they will. That's always going to be the case. I mean, when we set off for Africa for the first time for most of a year, we were out of touch. There was no email. Letters took 6 weeks. They were much appreciated when they arrived. No telephones. We'd disappeared, so to speak. We survived. More than survived, it was good for all of us. I mean, we went as a whole family the first time. So later, when Sally and I went and left the older ones behind, they said later, we often thought when you got on the plane, will we see them again? But we were kept at peace. It didn't destroy any of us. Quite the opposite. So, what's going on? Well, the first thing I think is simply to speak honestly about what you know about yourself. Of course, most of the time, we don't want to know anything about ourselves. Isn't it amazing that when he begins his ministry, Jesus begins with precisely that point? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The moment we start self-examination with even a modicum of honesty, we don't discover a great deal to be proud of, do we? We have to dredge through our lives to find little bits that we can be proud of, so to speak, in public. But the reality, it's quite different. We have thoughts which we fondle, and we'd be utterly ashamed if everybody knew them. God knows them. He tells us, I don't look on your actions. I look on your intentions. Depart from me, for I never knew you, he says to people who claim to discharge evil spirits and raise the dead, I never knew you. That's a terrifying thought. So human nature is real, and it's bad news. But the honesty to face it, says Jesus, gives you the kingdom. You may not know it. We're all on a journey. We got stuck, I think, in a way for some time. I first began to really have to think about it the first time I went to Russia. And I was talking, I can't remember the exact situation, but a conversation came up about Billy Graham's campaign in Moscow. And when he got to the end and the appeal to come forward, the whole crowd rushed forward almost. It was overwhelming. They thought they were going to get something. 5 or 6 years later, they couldn't find any converts from that crusade. And that was a reason for serious thought. It didn't lead in that context to growth. I believe that Billy Graham himself said at the end of his life that if he did it again, he would spend much, much more time on discipleship. After all, that's the divine model, isn't it? Christ spent 3 years with basically a very small group of people, the apostles and a few others. He did not write a word. He did not ask people to make commitments. He asked them to think and keep the law and realize what that meant. And he told them that he was the way, the truth, and the life. And they didn't really understand it, but they had some inkling, as when Peter, when Jesus said just about the most horrendous thing you could say to a Jewish crowd, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, I have no part in you. And many Jews left at that point. They were so horrified. And Jesus said to the disciples, you're going to leave too? And Peter said, where will we go? You have the words of life. They knew they were words of life, but they got a long way to go. But Jesus knew that. Why are we so unwilling to follow his model in that way? Nicodemus would be another example of this phenomenon. He watched Jesus. Now, amazingly for him, there was a certain degree of envy, I think, as he watched the way Jesus taught and had everyone's attention. And more than that, how many professors do you think who can sit back and say, well, at least they remember all my narratives and all my miracles? Never wrote anything down. and yet he had more impact on human life than any other person. It can't be reduced. So Nicodemus, he decides to go and talk to Jesus about where this power in his teaching comes from. Jesus knew. I mean, as John says elsewhere, he did not need to be told what was in a man. He knew. And so he knew that Nicodemus's real question was, why can't I teach like you do when I'm supposed to be a Pharisee, a leader of the Jews? And Jesus actually teases him with that. You, a leader of the Jews, and I have to teach you these things? But then he's so literalistic. You must be born again. He said, that's impossible. Can't go back into the womb. And Jesus said, no. You have to be born naturally, but you also have to be reborn spiritually, set free from the damage that sin has done to the human race. Nicodemus did get it, obviously, by his subsequent behavior. We know that, but he was overwhelmed at that point. In John 3, there's no evidence that he is blown away on the spot. But he has met his match, and that's not going to go away. When the truth has been spoken to us and we know that it's truth, we may refuse it for a long while. But truth is powerful. And when we start to turn, we always find open hearts. That weariness will toss them to my breast, says God. So Nicodemus is a wonderful example. You must be born again. And you do not understand how that happens, because it's not your doing. All that you do is open up a bit and allow the Spirit to do the work that he does. Now, one of the men on Saturday morning, he relatively recently was overwhelmed by the love of Christ for him in a personal way, and it shows in his life. He has a cheerfulness and a warmth that only comes from that. The Russians said, we can always tell Christians they have open faces. That's an interesting thought. And there is something about someone who knows Christ, even though, like all of us, we're struggling. I don't count myself to arrive, says Paul, but I press on. We'll press on, people, but we have reasons for pressing on. And it shows. I mean, in earlier years, I was doing a lot of traveling. Now I'm getting a little tired, a little old. I can't do as much. So I would turn up at an airport to be met by someone who I'd never met before. And it's astonishing. You look around the people as you come down the steps into the baggage claim area or some similar point in you'll come out through security, and there are always crowds of people waiting, and you can look around. We always recognize one another. Now, they may have seen a picture of me, but I haven't seen a picture of them. But before they say anything, I'm pretty sure that's the person who's meeting me. I don't know how that works, but I know it's pretty reliable. We can see one another if only we would practice seeing. But we're so narcissistic. We've been caught up in this. That's what all these screens do to us. They focus on self. That's what's so bad about them, especially the sort of TikTok rubbish where the girls in particular seem to want to try and make their peer group feel bad. They want to show off, I'm more beautiful than you or whatever. It all becomes self-referential, and that's a disaster. Switch off your screens. At least have a day a week when you don't deal with your screen. You can easily put a note up there saying, I don't answer emails. If you want to talk to me on this day, here's a landline telephone number. You can call me that way. But please don't do it unless it's necessary. There are various ways you can do it. Even watching the internet on a computer has destructive effects as well as positive ones. So I know that I can reduce the length of time that I can concentrate on a book by watching screens for an hour or so. It reduces that. I mean, there's not a student out there pretty well today who would go to the library and read for 5 or 6 hours. But that was pretty normal for serious students when I was at university. But of course, it was a very different world. Only 3 or 4% of the population went to university. I think we should go back to that. But look at some of the names of people who have come to faith in their adult life. Tom Holland is one of the recent ones I really like. I mean, he was a historian, and as a little boy, he loved the brutality of the wars in ancient times. Then he wrote first a book on Islam and then one on Western history. And he realized Christ was central to this, and all the things I love, he said, they came from Christianity. So now he's a Christian. I've not heard him explain how that came to be. But in talking to Tom Wright, he says something like this. He says, it seems to me that Christ and St. Paul planted time bombs under history, and they're still going off. And Tom Wright is nodding his head vigorously in agreement. These explosions that happen in our hearts and minds that have been planned forever. Stop and think about it. Who have you known during your life who led you in the right direction? That will help you think. Watching a conversion happen, or even reading about them, is the most moving thing that is predictable in my life. I find the actual eruption of grace in someone's life to be just overwhelming, just to watch it happen. And usually from a human point of view, what happens are conversations and books, and suddenly somebody's life is picked up, turned around, and they're marching off in an opposite direction. Take the first Gentile converts. Peter has to have that vision in which all sorts of animals he's not supposed to eat, and the vision says he's told to kill and eat. He says, I can't do that. And then God says, what I have said is pure is pure. And then he wakes up. And there at the gate is a messenger from the local Roman official who wants to talk to him. He goes, and they want to hear about the gospel, and they're converted on the spot. It says they believe and are baptized just like that, the first Gentile converts. One conversation. They were so wide open. Wonderful, amazing. I mean, it stunned the old Jews. Luke, in describing the reaction of the Jews in Jerusalem when Peter went back and said, not only had he eaten with Jews and eaten Gentile food, they'd become Christians. And the stuffy old saints, so to speak, took a little while to digest this, and then they said to one another then. To the Gentiles also, God has given the gift of repentance, the second beatitude. When we actually feel the guilt that we all have in a way that overwhelms us. That's a gift, not a right. Most people don't see it. The criminal has hardened himself to that, doesn't see it anymore, sees only his way of being. But grace can reach into all those situations. What happened to us, I think, certainly to me, is the acceptance of a limited view of the world coming out of experimental science, which was a gift of Christian theology, so that we began to believe that science could solve all the questions. And what that did was cut off the metaphysical, the spiritual, because it couldn't be measured and therefore wasn't science, it was just personal feeling. And so the university, particularly in the science faculty, began to be tacitly atheistic. They said, oh, rubbish. But of course, that's changed now. God's grace is amazing. And where has it changed first? Well, if you want to send your children to university and have them come back with a faith, hard science is a good place to go. Molecular biology and advanced physics, both the very small and the very big, both show this cosmos is not time plus chance. Real science, hard science, is awe-inspiring. Oh my goodness, what does this mean? DNA is a punch between the eyes for the atheists, if they will but stop and look at what they're looking at. Its probability of happening by chance is 0. And what's happening with cosmology doesn't look like evolution either. And quantum physics, well, beyond belief. Our world is awesome in the very best sense of the word. And so one of the ways that you can do that is simply to say, isn't this or that I've recently discovered absolutely amazing? The guy who discovered, and he said he didn't discover it, it was shown it, but not only is DNA capable of carrying the information to make almost all of you and me in a language that has only 4 letters in it and only makes 3-letter words, and 1,000 of those 3-letter, 1,000 of those bases, 300 of the plus of the 3-letter words makes a protein. And then they discovered that there were 2 words that, rather like we can read what was written on a parchment underneath if it has the appropriate physical characteristics, but this one is even better. In the same sequence of DNA, you can start at number 1 and go 1, 2, 3, and start at 2 and go 2, 3, 4, and then go in triplets up to about 1,000. 2 functional proteins in the same sequence. That cannot happen by chance. So look around the world and ask God to show you what is awesome. Sometimes it's children who need to remind you of this as they explore a world and easily enthralled. The snow is just disappearing here, and shortly one of these little things that God dumps into nature, there's a tiny grass called blue-eyed grass. It's one of my favorite flowers, but you need a magnifying glass to really appreciate it. Why? The Darwinians can come up with some sort of reason for it, just so stories. But it's just pure beauty. Beauty is an argument for faith. It brings people to faith. Many of them who said, as the opening poem said, that many of them love the creation and miss the creator for a long while, and then the truth dawns. Roger Scruton is probably one of the best examples of that. If you can find his BBC film, it was on Scottish BBC on beauty. Have a taste. Thank you. It's good to talk to you. It helps me clear my mind a little bit. Whether it clears yours, I don't know. But keep your eyes open for people who are coming to faith. Hershey Ali is a good recent example. God bless you all.